Alrighty, what's going on, guys? Professor Kirk here, back with another video. Today we're going to be going over some metabolism and such for chapter 4. Just keep in mind these videos are just broad overviews of things that you'll need to know, such as concepts and ideas. If you have any questions about the details, feel free to reach out to your professor or your graduate student. So let's get into it. The first thing that you're going to want to know, in referencing chapter 2, I think it was, when we went over metabolism, exercising muscle, is that the body is primarily going to utilize this thing called glucose, which we talked about in chapter 2. And now, if this word looks new to you, you should definitely go back and look at the previous chapters before continuing on. And the reason the body is going to use glucose first, or as its primary fuel source, is because it's easiest. Glucose has the least complex form between the other four, the other three macronutrients, which are going to be, we have proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And so these glucose molecules are going to be your carbohydrates. They're a very simple structure. They're not as difficult to break down as your proteins or your fats. So they're going to be used the fastest. Next, after your body breaks down glucose, it's going to go into the breakdown of glycogen, glycogen is just when your body, let's say you eat a meal, right? Say you eat some McDonald's or something like that, God forbid. But let's say you eat some glucose, some McDonald's, and you exercise a little bit, but not too hard, and you go and sit down, right? So all that extra food that you didn't necessarily use in your workout is now saved in the form of glycogen, and it's now just sitting in your body. So next time you do work out and you want to, work out really, really hard, if you use all your glucose, your body will then access that glycogen, and it'll turn that glycogen into glucose so it can be used. The same is true for the activation of gluconeogenesis, which turns lactic acid and a few other things into glucose that your body can readily use. From here, something that's happening simultaneously with this glucose production is this catecholamine release. This means we're just releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine into our bloodstream just to get our muscles and stuff pumping, basically. For the fifth point for metabolism is the fat breakdown. So fats, they take a lot of time to be oxidized just because they're so complex, but they do yield a significant amount of energy. By energy, I mean ATP specifically. And these are going to be in the forms of these things called free fatty acids, FFA, which is going to have a glycerol backbone and 3 fatty acids attached to it. Now, transitioning from the metabolism, let's get into electrolytes electrolyte balance in regards to exercising muscle tissue. So with electrolytes, one thing that you're going to really notice when you start working out, you lose water merely due to sweating. Like you're going hard, you're really getting a pump up in the gym and such, and you start sweating pretty hard, or you're doing some cardio or something like that. What your body is going to do is it's going to need to retain that water as efficiently as possible. And it's going to do this with 2 hormones in particular. The first is called Antiderivative Hormones. This is produced by your posterior pituitary gland. Now what this does is it acts on the collecting ducts within your nephrons, which are located in your kidneys, and it literally takes the water back from your urine. That's literally how antidiuretic hormone does. It travels down to your collecting ducts, and it's like, hey, all that water, and it sees the urine, and it sees the water, and it sees the urine and the water mixed together. It's like, hey, I'm going to need all that water back, and it literally takes it back through, I think osmosis, I believe is what they refer to it as in your chapter. And then moving on from, the antidiuretic hormone, we have something called this hormone called aldosterone, which is secreted by, I believe, your anterior pituitary gland. Now, the mechanism for aldosterone is pretty important, so we're going to spend the rest of our time on this video going through it. So imagine this. Imagine you have your urea, which is your urine, and your water mixed together. And this is exactly how your body is. Most of your urine is water. Then you have this salt, this is sodium, right? Now what's going to happen is aldosterone is going to tell this sodium to move over here. Now what happens is water always follows a concentration gradient. That basically means water follows wherever salt's going to go, right? So when that sodium moves, it takes that water with it, thus leaving the urine. As a result, this urine becomes more concentrated. There's not as much water. By concentrated, literally mean there's less water within it. And so that's one of the mechanisms, that's one of the main concepts you're really going to need to know for this chapter and probably future courses that you take in physical education. Now let's look into something called the Renin angioaldosterone system. I know it's kind of hard to see. I should definitely use a different color. Well, let's say you're exercising, right? you're experiencing a low blood pressure. What's going to happen is that low blood pressure is going to trigger release of something called renin, which is just a signaling protein. Let's call it that. Yeah, let's go with that. Now, renin is then going to be converted into this thing called angiotensinogen. It's going to convert angiotensinogen into this molecule called angiotensin 1. Now, the reason why it's going from angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1 is because this gen at the end means that it's something that's inactive. I believe in biochemistry they refer to this as I think it's a zymogen. I could be wrong, but basically this is like an inactive form of angiotensin. So what's it going to do? It's going to cut that off, boom, and turn that into angiotensin 1. Now, angiotensin 1 is then going to travel through to this this hormone called angiotensin converting enzyme. That means it literally takes angiotensin 1 and then makes it into angiotensin 2. It just levels it up. It's like angiotensin 1 on steroids. Now, from here, this angiotensin 2 can then go and signal to the anterior pituitary gland to be like, hey, I need you to release this aldosterone so I can absorb water from my human's body because they're sweating and they're losing water and we need that water. And that's basically how the system works. I mean, granted, this has been simplified, but that's essentially what you're going to need to know for exam and quizzes and more of the concept of the class. But if you had any questions, feel free to let me know, and I hope that was helpful.